अस्सलामु अलैकुम अजीज तालबा और तालबात, my dear listeners. Performance management, the course we are pursuing with you. In this connection, today we will learn about performance dimensions and measurement. What are some of the dimensions of performance and how do we measure them? This is basically a detail of what we have talked about before, and we will learn in a way those nitty-gritties about performance in different organizations. The slide which you are looking at now, it shows learning outcomes of this particular session. We will design a PMS with the task and contextual dimensions of the performance. We will try to understand that performance should be placed in a context. We can adopt trait approach to measure performance. We can adopt behavior approach to measure performance, or we can adopt results approach to measure performance. What I mean by these three is trait, how individuals basically think, what are their attitudes, what are their traits of personality or thinking, how do they behave in different situations, and finally the results they produce. Obviously, the results approach is the most important for this course because we are generally concerned about the results of our efforts as individuals, as groups, as teams, as organizations. So we will focus more on results approach. But before I move on, I like to mention that in many situations, you will probably use all three approaches: trait, behavior, and results. In today's complex world, in today's environment in which work is going on, in which organizations produce their goods and services, probably all three approaches are important, and sometimes all three are used simultaneously to measure performance of individuals, groups, teams, organizations. We did talk about task and context. Now try to understand the difference between these two concepts. These are very important concepts. Task. Task is the job. Task is you are using certain materials and you are producing something. You are not concerned other than producing the product or the service. You are not concerned what are its short-term, medium-term, or long-term effects. You are just concerned with the production of the product or production of the service which you are asked for. You are using raw materials. You are replenishing raw materials. By using raw materials, you are producing goods, manufacturing products, and then raw materials are replenished. They are brought, new raw materials are produced to keep on producing the goods. For example, bringing many raw materials produce, for example, these cups or mugs, clay, mud, heat, chemicals. You produce them, your job is finished. Somebody will take care of it for marketing, for selling, making a profit. Probably that is none of your job. So that is task. Context. This is very important to understand. Context is in the environment you are working. Situations sometimes change. Product quality may change because change in circumstances, change in the context. Context in this case could be manufacturing of cups and mugs, for example. Maybe the people who are around you who are giving a shape to the clay which is being used to manufacture this mug. If that person is not producing the right shaped mugs, you probably are acting to some extent in the context in which that person may not be in good mental condition. Maybe he or she is upset. Maybe he or she is not in a good mood. You probably help that person to get into a good mood and produce the product or the mug which is of the desired standard or quality. So, context and task, both are very important. But here you must understand that details about the task are given in your job description. You can learn about it from written materials which are passed on to you. These are part of your job. An employee can be very efficient in task-oriented environment when he is concerned about production of products or services, but not too concerned about what will happen later. On the other hand, contextual performance or contextual learning or contextual work, it is not given in your job description. It is actually learning by doing. You learn from the context, you learn from situations. You learn it by doing, you learn it from colleagues. You learn from making mistakes. And that contextual performance is very critical in certain organizations. I like to make a comment on contextual cultures. Some cultures are high context cultures. Some cultures are low context cultures. Some cultures are task oriented. Other cultures are context oriented. Asian cultures in Pakistan and also in China, for example, and other Asian countries, these are high context cultures. Western cultures, particularly American culture, is a low context culture because there is task orientation more of a task orientation in developed countries, particularly the US. So we need to understand these two concepts very clearly: task orientation and context orientation. If we understand these two, probably we can make our organizations more effective, more efficient, and also we can help individuals to perform the best and probably optimally. Now let us learn more about task-oriented way of performing and measuring performance. Then we'll learn more about context-oriented. When we are concerned with the task, we actually are not concerned with effect, the total effect, the ultimate effect. Ultimately, what happens? You are given a task, you are not concerned what it may actually ultimately produce in terms of its effect on the organization, on the individual, or on something else. For example, if you are given a task in a restaurant that you have to open the door for the incoming guests or outgoing customers. As soon as somebody walks close to the door of the restaurant, you just open the door. And if somebody wants to get out of the restaurant, you just open the door again. You are not concerned what will happen later. You are not concerned whether that is a real customer or maybe a robber, generally speaking. But if your task is to check if the person is a robber or a customer, maybe there is a person who is a guard or security officer. So his task is, the task of the security officer is to find out whether the customer is a customer or that customer is actually disguised in a robber. So task-oriented approach tells you to do your task. You are not concerned whether that person is a robber or a customer, theoretically speaking. But a security officer, yes, he or she is concerned about this aspect. So this is task orientation. But task orientation may be a partial work in certain circumstances. For example, in the same restaurant, if a waiter is responsible to take order from the menu for the food and deliver that order or that food on the table, this is his task. And if he is only concerned to deliver the food which is ordered, that may be a partial approach to measuring performance, just only task-oriented. Because if food is good, delivered good, but the guest did not like the way you put food on the table, it probably was ill-mannered, it probably was not liked by the customer, that means you did not do your job right. Now, to further explain this point, if you feel that the customer should feel satisfied not just from the food quality, but also presentation, but also how you are being treated by the waiter or waitress. That is part of the game. That is part of the job. That is part of the performance. So you must understand that here task orientation is not enough for your performance to be measured as very good or excellent. On that account, context approach is important. To explain it further, customers have different orientation, different personality, different preferences. The task of the waiter or waitress is important to understand what sort of customer she or he is dealing with. What could be his or her priorities when he or she is taking the food, eating the food. Now, if you have delivered the food and then you walk away, never come back to ask if the customers, the guests, they need anything, drinks, water, or maybe additional food, or maybe possibly something else, maybe a salt, maybe pepper, maybe something else which is needed. If you don't come, that means you thought that your task is to deliver the food, and then what happens, you are not concerned. And let me tell you, that may not be very productive. That may not be very good. It may not go to your favor, and your performance may be measured low. So context is critically important. I was trying to mention that you learn the context, about context, contextual performance from colleagues, from experience, from making mistakes, and learning from those mistakes. So ultimate effect of your work, your performance, will have to consider the ultimate effect or ultimate outcome of your work. In terms of contextual performance, behaviors that contribute to the organization's effectiveness by providing a good environment in which task performance can occur. What I mean to say, that if the environment in the restaurant are not good, maybe it is hot, cooling system is not working well, then probably your performance will go low on account of your own behavior, because it is hot and you are not comfortable, and also because of the attitude and behavior of your customers. So environment is very important for contextual performance. You must like your job. You must be enthused about the job. You must be willing to make extra effort to complete the job. Sometimes you may have to do other things which are not your job. For example, if you are a waiter or waitress, then there might be a piece of paper, maybe a piece of food on the floor, looks bad. Somebody can put his foot on it or her foot on it, may get messy. You are a waiter. Either you clean it yourself or you ask the person who is responsible to do the cleaning. So this is contextual performance. This is loyalty to the organization. If you are loyal to organization, you probably will not be shy to do those things which promote the image of the organization. This is actually very important in today's work environment. That how do you actually perform to promote the image of the organization? So context, situational conditions, situational factors, situational intelligence, situational behavior, that needs to be learned on everyday basis. You learn from your life if you like. If you don't want to learn, obviously it is your choice. But when you see an event occurring around you, maybe you are not part of it, but you are just observing, you can learn from there. You may be part of the experience yourself. You may be part of that event yourself. If that happens, you learn from it. You can face the similar situation later on. And as I said, if you want to learn about context, that context learning, contextual learning, and then contextual performance out of your contextual learning or situational learning, you can improve your contextual performance if you learn from context, if you learn from situations. And as I said before, it is important that you not only learn from your colleagues, your juniors and seniors, you also learn from doing things. And it is very important to say that learning by doing is much more important than learning from books, lectures, or sessions, or training, or something else. There is no match to practical experience. So, learn from the experience of yours and that of the experience of others. If you look at the screen, how do you see punctuality? How do you see the absence, the importance of absence from work? How these are important? In a bank, punctuality and not being absent is critically important. In certain organizations, it may not be that important. So you must learn. If you have worked in an organization where absenteeism was tolerated, and you transferred or you got a job in a bank, probably they will not be that tolerant to your absenteeism. So you must learn from the behavior of the people around you, how punctuality is valued, how being present during due hours and due days in banks or similar organizations, how important this is. So you learn from the context. You learn from colleagues. You learn from, for example, you make a mistake and you are not present on a day, and you will be probably given a show cause notice or something. So you learn from these, as I said, mistakes. If you learn from mistakes, they don't remain mistakes. They actually become experience. And experience is always valued. Try to understand. If you learn from a mistake, it doesn't remain a mistake. It becomes part of your experience. And if you are experienced, then people will value you. Then people will actually give you more salary or more benefits because you have learned from your mistakes. And as I said before, you must be concerned about the overall effects of your work, of your task. And you can only do that if you are alert about the situations and you have enough expertise to handle situations. If a customer in a restaurant is unhappy for something, you must be able to address that unhappiness and transform that unhappiness into happiness so that the customer comes again to the restaurant. This is critically important and you must understand that. Now, volunteering to carry out those tasks which are not formally part of your job. No, that is part of contextual performance. You can make, for example, constructive suggestions. You can feel that how the environment of a restaurant could improve, how certain problems could be addressed, how you make other people to cooperate with each other, how do you assist manager or management or co-workers or customers, how do you see rules and regulations, how do you comply organizational values and policies, how do you endorse and support and defend organizational objectives. Organization, for example, the hotel or the restaurant, it actually wants that customers are satisfied, customers are loyal. How do you represent your organization, your restaurant? How do you create favorable environment or favorable attitudes of customers towards that restaurant? What do you say in a particular situation if the customer becomes unhappy about food, about behavior, about environment? For example, if air conditioning is not working, you need probably to explain why it is not working. You may say that there was problems about cooling system or some other issue or some other problem, so that the customer takes the image or carries the image with him or her or them that it was a temporary problem. It will not persist. If the same customer or customers come again, they probably will not expect the same kind of uncomfortable environment regarding cooling in the restaurant. So if you are concerned about these things, that means you are concerned about contextual performance, and you are using your learning from colleagues, friends, and your own behavior and your own learning by doing. That means you are sensitive to context and contextual learning, and you will use this learning for improving performance not only of yours but also that of your colleagues, juniors, seniors, and ultimately your own unit, department, or the organization. In today's competitive environment, in today's competitive world, in today's social, economic, and political environment, in companies, in organizations, and across the world through globalization, because of globalization, we need to include both task orientation approach and also context orientation approach to measure performance. This is an important dimension and a message that we cannot just focus on task or only on context. We need to focus on both. Even if we are involved in manufacturing or in services, we need to give outstanding performance because of the competition I mentioned, because of the globalization factor. Globalization has brought competition to your homes, to around you, in your own neighborhood. There is a lot of trade going on across the world. The world is not the same as it used to be. Even raw materials and energy travel from one part of the world to another part of the world, from South America to Asia or to China, from Africa to China, or from another part of the world to Americas. out of this competition, there is a need to deliver best products and services. So that is why there is an increasing or emerging need to include both task performance dimensions and context dimension regarding performance of individuals. You probably do understand and know that there are different international laws regarding child labor, regarding effect of manufacturing certain products, for example, yarn, for example, leather goods, on the environment, on water, on air, in terms of air pollution, in terms of water pollution, in terms of noise pollution. So there is a growing competition, and in this growing competitive environment, you need to give outstanding performance not only in production of goods or services, but also the context in which those goods and or services are being produced. Sometimes there are certain laws which are inflicted on exports to certain countries from certain countries. For example, if certain goods are produced by using child labor, these may not be permitted to enter into foreign markets or export markets. Similarly, if there is an impact on environment, if there is an impact on polluting airspace, water, or unhealthy noise for humans, then there may be again a pressure on you to use both context and task orientation. In the same context, if I may mention that interpersonal relations, interpersonal cooperation, effectiveness of teamwork, in these things contextual performance become increasingly important. As I said, employees learn about these things from the behaviors of colleagues. Employees who are being rated with reference to task and context, they will become sensitive to task and context both. Supervisors who evaluate performance find it difficult to ignore contextual performance, even if there are no specific questions about it. So it is sensible to include contextual performance more explicitly than leaving it to implicit judgments. There could be a bias when you make judgments about context or contextual performance, but that bias can be minimized by sharing the experience again and again, by telling how these things are important in certain given situations. In other words, to sum this particular topic which was under discussion in terms of combining task orientation and context orientation, in today's world, probably both are important, but first task and then context. But context is important in terms of overall impact, effect, short, medium, and long term. So my advice is that you must give due importance to both, and if you are sensitive to contextual issues, your overall performance and your overall rating as a worker will improve. Try to understand. Employees don't work in a vacuum. They work in social environment, in an environment in which humans, machines, raw materials, computers, communication networks, they are all working together. They create an environment. So they don't work in a vacuum. So the environment in which they work, they influence individual behaviors. They influence the context. They change the context. So context makes you work either efficiently or inefficiently, effectively or ineffectively, producing high quality goods and services, or maybe compromised goods and services. So we need to understand how you can create those congenial environment, congenial conditions, supportive conditions, which makes you act effectively, makes you produce goods and services that ultimately bring you high rating as a performer. If you look at the screen, you will see boxes. In these boxes, they show performer is an individual working with a team with certain traits in a given work situation, and also engages in certain behaviors in a sequence, in a line, then producing certain results, and ultimately all those results, when combined, produce an effect. Effect for you, for your unit, for your department, for your organization, and ultimately for your country, and possibly for the world as a whole. These are all linked. Your performance as an individual is linked with the total performance of the world. In one of the previous sessions, I said that the total output, economic growth in the world, which is the result of billions of people across the world, that total output, economic growth of last 50 years was greater than the total economic growth during the previous 500 years. Now look at the performance of 7 billion people around the world. They produce so much in 50 years that it is more than the total performance, economic performance or economic output of individuals, of the population during the previous 500 years. We may not be too sensitive about it, but let me tell you, the world or the world system creates an environment in which each individual throughout the world do something every day, contributing towards the total GDP of the world. How it happens? This is through a system, and that may be called performance management system. So what I'm trying to make you sensitive about is that how it starts, how an individual is linked with the total performance management system of the world through international law, through international trade laws, through other laws which make us work in a direction, in one direction. That is, to contribute according to your skills and abilities towards the GDP of the world. If you look at the screen, total effect may be defined as a mix of profit, goodwill, satisfaction for all, good life for all, and good for the humanity as a whole. So if you see all these things together, you learn how total behavior of an individual, attitude of an individual, actions of an individual, they actually, how do they contribute towards performance? As I mentioned in the beginning, that there are three major approaches to measure performance. I named them trait approach, behavior approach, results approach. Let me say that these three approaches are not mutually exclusive. If you look at the screen, many organizations adopt both results and behavior approach to measure performance. Now, if you look at the first trait approach, it actually emphasizes the individual performer and ignores the specific situation. Means it ignores the context. It is focused on results only. Well, sometimes you are concerned with results. You are concerned that the doorman opens the door as soon as somebody likes to walk in the restaurant or somebody likes to get out of the restaurant. How does it create certain issues, certain problems? As we talked about, possibly a robber coming in. So, trait approach may be partially good. It may have its own negative consequences. Actually, your own cognitive abilities make you learn how other factors are important, not just trait approach. It is justified, it is liked, it is mentioned here because of a positive relationship found between abilities of individuals regarding the work they are focusing on, regarding the work they are assigned. For example, in a restaurant situation, aggressive attitudes and behaviors are not useful. They are not useful in commercial organizations. But in armed forces, for example, in security-related organizations, in an international conflict, in a war, sometimes these aggressive behaviors are important. And on that account, trait approach is used to measure performance. And you probably do know, sometimes due to such aggressive behaviors in international wars, the armed personnel are rewarded with medals, prizes, and other rewards when they die in such international conflicts. So trait approach sometimes is important, is useful, but mostly in commercial organizations, in commercial affairs, it is not very useful. So trait approach is fair in certain situations, and if you use it in commercial organizations, the chances are that your system may seem to be unfair to employees, because at times traits are not under the control of individuals, and these are not, or these are possibly not changeable with some training or something, not fairly stable over a period of time, over a lifespan. So what people do in such situations, they understand, the management understands the traits of an individual, personality of an individual, and sometimes put him into that job. For example, A person could be good in interpersonal environment, interpersonal situations, or could be good in managing people, but he is put into, let's say, due to training in accounts. Now that accounts training is not compatible with the person, with the personality, with the traits of the individual, with the attitude, predisposition of the individual. When it is not compatible, the organization may, or the management may, transfer that accountant from accounts branch to, let's say, marketing branch, to a sales branch, where he has the opportunity to interact with people. And let me tell you, there is a limitation to this trait approach as well. People do change because of sometimes training, sometimes experience, sometimes preferences change. And due to change of those preferences, people's attitudes, traits, behaviors do change, and they start doing things much better. They start performing much better in other areas rather than the area in which the person is assigned to work. If you look at the screen, you will see that individuals do possess certain traits, but if they want to change, they can learn new skills, new knowledge, and ultimately that those new skills, that new knowledge may change his person or personality, and ultimately that could make him perform even better in a different department or a different situation. Now, let us talk about using behavior approach. Behavior approach emphasizes what employees do on the job and does not consider employees' traits or the results from their behavior. Process-oriented approach that emphasizes how an employee does the job. The behavior approach focuses on the process, on how things are being done, not on the result, not on the trait, not on the personality basis. Now, when behavior approach is important, there is a link between behavior and results. That is for sure. Desired results may only be achieved through right behaviors. If a salesperson is good in communications but cannot close the deal, it may be due to some other external factors. Maybe recession in the world, maybe recession in the country, maybe some laws around that deal. You learn about these things in papers. Sometimes a deal can occur, but there are forces which are creating hurdles. Sometimes behaviors are good, or in another situation, in a contrasting situation, behavior is not good, not very useful, but the result is fine, result is good. For example, as a pilot, you are supposed to do safety checks on the aircraft. Now that's a routine. On one day, you don't do those security checks, your behavior is not right. But you took the plane from one destination, from one place to another to the destination safely. So the result is good, but behavior was not good. Sometimes it happens, but there is a relationship, as I said. When the link between behaviors and results is not very obvious, focus on behaviors as opposed to outcomes. Teaching, for example, if you are teaching, results may occur 1 year later. So you need to learn, you need to make a judgment on the basis of the process, how a person is teaching. it is possible, as I said. For example, you probably do know one of such space missions flopped when the shuttle exploded a few years ago. Now, that doesn't mean that engineers did not work. There was a mistake somewhere, that is possible, but engineers did do work hard, and they must be rewarded for that, not that it failed, so everybody has failed. That is not right. Sometimes poor results are due to causes which are not in your control, which are not in your own control. You cannot do much about it. So on that account, I like to say that behavioral approach has its own limitations, but behavior approach is very important because it has a strong link with results approach. Results approach, the most popular, the most important, because every organization is concerned with the individual's performance in terms of results, not just behaviors, not just how do you do things. So you measure results objectively, not subjectively. So there is the data is objective, the performance is measured objectively, and it is intuitively appealing because you can tell yourself that I have done this thing. I gave you the example in one of the sessions that Ford Motor Company used to manufacture cars, individual cars, one single piece by 14 people, for example, and they could see that they have done the job. So results approach is very appealing, very important. When you use results approach, it is, as I said, measured objectively, and people do not have a lot of objection due to the possible absence of subjectivity. In other words, results approach remains critical and very important. I said before that results are strongly linked with behaviors, and if behaviors are result oriented, then usually people focus more on results approach for measuring performance rather than behavior or trait approach. Results can be used to show improvement over time. Results can be used to show how people do the job right. It can show how certain behaviors can result in a positive manner. Competitors cooperate, produce more goods if results approach is used in terms of measuring. Now, if you see all these points, you will understand that all three approaches are good, but mostly results approach is taken as most important, most useful. In today's session, we learned 5 important concepts: task-oriented, context-oriented approach regarding performance measurement. Then 3 other important concepts: trait approach, behavioral approach, and results approach. All these 3 are linked, and they 3 usually are used to measure performance, to improve performance. Because when you rate people by using these 3 concepts, then the individuals or employees get sensitive and they improve their performance in these 3 different dimensions or approaches. I mentioned that sometimes task orientation is important, but in today's comparative world, both task orientation and context orientation, they have become significantly important. So if you keep all these 5 concepts in your head, visualize how you can use in your organization if you're working, and if you get a chance to work in an organization later on, try to use all these 5 concepts to improve not only your own performance, but also the performance of others who may be your subordinates, your colleagues, and sometimes, if you may agree with me, sometimes even seniors, because you can make suggestions, because you can make advices to them in terms of improving the performance of either yours or the performance of other people in the organization. With these words, Khuda Hafiz, and thanks for listening.